Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Breaking in the Olympics speaker series. I'm MiRi Fogarty, and I'm a B-Girl and professor of dance at York University in Toronto, Canada. And I'm hosting with my co-organizer of the speaker series, Dr. Jason Eng, a B-boy musician and postdoctoral fellow at Cypher Project University College Cork in Ireland. And we also want to thank Hannah George Wheeler for helping to moderate behind the scenes with us today.
The speaker series, as many of you know, is really a platform for researchers studying the important cultural moment of breaking at the Paris Olympics of 2024. The series intends to open up a conversation between researchers, practitioners, and the general public to share knowledge. It's an opportunity for everyone to present their research and progress. The presenters here today submitted abstracts to be part of the special issue on breaking the Olympics for Global Hip Hop Studies, the academic journal, to be published in 2023. Many of the presenters are in early days of their research, and this is a practice space for those ideas, so it's not the final say on any of their work. Just before we move on, I'd like to give a shout out to Adam Hopps and Griff Rolifson for giving us the space to explore this critical moment in the special issue of Global Hip Hop Studies, and to the Cypher Project for their ongoing support of the speaker series. In today's session, though, we'll be looking a little bit more in depth in different directions about breaking in the Olympics, some very unique directions, and I guess we'll just jump straight in. Our first presenter is Jacqueline Melindy. She is currently enrolled in her first year of doctoral studies at York University's Department of Dance. She completed her undergraduate degree at York University with a bachelor's in dance and a community arts practice certificate. She then completed her master's in fashion from Ryerson University. She writes on numerous topics, including B-Girls in Toronto and Canadian celebrity fashion collections. Her dissertation research will explore the life cycle of sneakers, from the extraction of materials to the designing and construction of sneakers, and lastly, the use of sneakers by hip-hop dancers. So, Jacqueline, over to you. Take it away.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it says host disabled, so I wasn't made a co-host.
Oh, hang on.
Sorry, I thought I was. Should it work now?
It should work now.
Okay, we're good. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Good. So I'll be talking about hip hop fashion, identity, and functionality. I first became interested in what B-boys and B-girls were wearing when I first started breaking in my undergraduate degree about 7 years ago. I started breaking at York University and then participated in the Toronto B-Girl movement, and then went on to become a part of the larger breaking community in Toronto. I really wanted to own Adidas Gazelles, Adidas track pants, big t-shirts, crew necks, and hoodies. This came as a surprise to me because not long before this, I was dancing in skin-tight leggings or tights and bodysuits. But I didn't just want to look like a B-girl while dancing. I also wanted to look like a B-girl in my everyday life. This made me feel that there was something quite significant about breaking fashion, both in terms of functionality, but also in terms of identity. Sometimes when I share my research interests with other breakers, I'm met with reactions of agreement, in which they agree that fashion or clothing is a significant element of hip hop culture and breaking culture. On the other hand, sometimes the reactions are different. One B-boy from Toronto once replied, "What fashion?" as if to imply B-boys and B-girls have no fashion sense or aren't concerned with what they wear. Just yesterday, while discussing this talk with a B-boy from Toronto, I told him I was interested in what breakers were planning to wear to the Olympics. He summarized that they should be more concerned with training than what they are planning to wear, and he doesn't think Canada is equipped with the facilities to compete with other countries. So why worry about what you're wearing to the Olympics? But this talk is not concerned with Canada's Olympic facilities. However, this talk is concerned with what B-boys and B-girls are planning to wear to the Olympics. This research questions if there is space for hip hop fashion in the Olympics. I plan to first review what was worn by the youth in the 2018 Breaking Olympics. Then I will interview B-boys and B-girls, as well as those who are involved in creating clothing guidelines for breakers in the Olympics. I am focused on breakers' preferences. Are they interested in displaying hip hop culture or aspects of their identity in their clothing for the Olympics? Or are they more interested in functionality? This research is also interested in whether there is space for hip hop fashion or subcultural fashion within Olympic uniforms that athletes wear for opening ceremonies and other events. I am also interested in how the Olympics might change the future of design for breakers' clothing. Some B-boys have already begun creating sneakers specifically for breaking, such as Carl Dizzy Alba's sneaker company Dizzy Threads. This talk will first review hip hop fashion history. It will then discuss subcultures of sports and dance in relation to the Olympics. And lastly, fashion in the Olympics, focusing in on some recent Canadian Olympic uniforms. In a style nobody can deal with, politics, style, and post-industrial city and hip hop, Trisha Rose states hip hop developed during the tail end of the Great Society, during America's short-lived federal commitment to Black civil rights and the pre-dawn of the Reagan-Bush era. She states that hip hop's starting place was in the Bronx, New York City. During this time, the bottom 20%, in which Black and Hispanic people made up the majority, went through an absolute decline, while the top 20% did the opposite. The poorest neighborhoods and the least powerful groups were the least protected. In freestyling how hip hop changed the fashion industry, Elena Romero furthers the context provided by Rose as she outlines the history of hip hop fashion. She explains the 1960s was the time of the African-American civil rights movement and the Black Panther movement. African-Americans were wearing dashikis, which are brightly colored, loose-fitting pullovers. Their style was considered au naturel, and they were wearing their afros, which were seen as a fashion and political statement. Black people were using fashion as a way to illustrate allegiance to a certain culture. In the 1970s, hip hop fashion was first introduced as a mix of African-American and Caribbean culture. In No Logo, Naomi Klein describes the start of the relationship between hip hop musicians and clothing lines, including the first hip hop sponsorship, Run DMC with Adidas. Before this, hip hop culture was not viewed as a source of influence in economics. Since then, several hip hop celebrities have endorsed brands or created brands of their own, including 50 Cent, Eminem, Jay-Z, LL Cool J, P. Diddy, and Kanye West. Contemporary discussions on hip hop fashion often start with a discussion of the fashions worn by the participants of hip hop culture in New York City in the 1970s, which includes B-boys and B-girls of the time. This is evident in the documentaries Fresh Dressed and Just for Kicks sneaker doc, where B-boys and B-girls are discussed in about the first 15 minutes of the documentary, but not mentioned again for the next hour and 15 minutes. Then as the discussion continues, it becomes centered around rap music, hip hop music, as well as the hip hop generation or the hip hop attitude. In my own research during my undergrad, I researched the fashion worn in Toronto by those in the breaking community. Breaking fashion is similar to the descriptions of hip hop culture fashion presented by Romero. Some descriptions of hip hop culture fashion were Levi's was the most popular denim. Participants were wearing shell-toed sneakers, personalized hoodies, and jackets in the beginning. From the interviews conducted, B-boys and B-girls have mentioned each of these items as clothing items they are wearing now. Romero describes that hip hop culture fashion had to be neat, clothes pressed, and shoes extra clean. Likewise, B-boys of today have mentioned the importance of being presentable. The popular colors at the time were navy, burgundy, brown, gray, black, and popular athletic brands were Adidas, Pumas, Nike. These colors and these brands have also been discussed by B-boys today as what they like to wear while they are breaking. Hip hop culture participants were inspired by relatives. Likewise, b-boys of today have mentioned members of their own crew as fashion role models. In the Vice article, How the Olympics Thirst for Youth Subculture Steamrolls the Sports We Love, Dova Myers explores the positives and negatives of subculture sports being a part of the Olympics. The Olympics often employs bodies with little connection to the subculture communities to oversee them, and there have been allegations of ossification, corruption, and detachment. The Olympics' popularity among young fans was dropping. The 2016 Games saw a 30% drop among viewers ages 18 to 34. In order to reflect younger audiences' interests, the IOC's strategic roadmap for the future, Olympic Agenda 2020, emphasized introducing sports that would appeal to younger viewers. It's the IOC's goal to get young people hooked on the Olympics at a young age so that they continue to watch it into their adult lives. The article includes Tony Hawk discussing skateboarding at the Olympics, where he says, "We were never looking for their validation. Olympics needs skateboarding more than skateboarding needs the Olympics. Similarly, breaking communities were not looking for validation from the Olympics and already had their own forms of validation within their communities. On the other hand, some b-boys and b-girls are cautiously optimistic about what the Olympics can do for their discipline." In Olympic skateboarding's helmet headache, Joshua Robinson discusses audience reactions to Olympic athletes not wearing helmets while skateboarding, many of which were parents and were frustrated to see the Olympic athletes not wearing helmets. However, the pros say that's exactly how they'd like to keep it. Robinson states skateboarding Summer Games debut may have marked the first time anyone won an Olympic medal while wearing cargo pants. He questions, do skaters actually need helmets? And just as importantly, for a sport that views itself as an entire lifestyle, what does a helmet say about the person underneath it? He argues it's not only a question of style in a sport defined as much by looks as its result, but also a matter of usefulness. Skaters say that adding a helmet to their outfits can throw off their carefully honed sense of balance. The helmet gets in the way more than anything, and helmets are almost considered taboo in skateboarding. I'm wondering, will there be similar reactions to breakers and what protective equipment they decide to wear? I'm not thinking about helmets so much, but what about knee pads or elbow pads or spin hats? Will there be or are there any restrictions on what breakers wear, and how does this play into protective equipment? In August 2020, Team Canada and its official outfitter, Hudson's Bay, released the Tokyo 2020 uniform kit, which included a graffiti-splashed jean jacket for the closing ceremony. The jacket was welcomed with a mix of outrage and delight, with one Twitter user going as far as, "I am screaming, this is Canada's closing ceremony fit, cancel the Olympics." Although the graffiti-splashed jacket could be read as a celebration or appropriation of subcultural fashion, including hip hop culture, on the other hand, athletes are banned from wearing apparel with political and protest messaging, including BLM at the Tokyo Olympics. In Knitting for Our Lives, the appropriation of the Corinthian sweaters by the Hudson's Bay during the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, Reagan Shroom analyzes how the HBC's Corinthian sweaters imitations alter the sweater's aesthetics, as well as affect those who create the original garments. She argues that the sweaters were a form of cultural appropriation, and she demonstrates how the people have an economic reliance on knitting, noting that this art is either a main or supplementary income for families who may already have a high need for economic assistance. It seems that HBC may have a history of appropriation when it comes to Canadian Olympic uniforms. One country's Olympic uniforms, which received positive attention within the fashion industry, is Liberia, with online articles from Vogue titled "Thanks to Teflar, this West African Olympic team will have the coolest uniform. And from high subnomadry, Liberia is about to have the steeziest Olympic uniforms. The uniforms are designed by Teflar Clemens. They are designed to be unisex basics aimed at subcultures long rejected or neglected by the establishment of the fashion world. The Olympic uniforms are performance gear, but they are also considered fashionable. In the New York Times article, "At the Olympic Games, Liberian sport cool looks," Clemens is quoted saying that he wants to open up the conversation about what sport and competition and performance really means. Liberia could be showing that, in fact, yes, there is space for hip hop fashion within the Olympics or the Olympics uniforms, or ways in which to showcase one's identity. Most recently, Lululemon has replaced Hudson Bay as Canada's Olympic clothier for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, in a deal that extends to the 2028 Summer Games in Los Angeles. Lululemon aims to provide high quality and stylish gear for Team Canada. So far, the reviews of the apparel have been more positive compared with Hudson Bay's Canadian tuxedo. Aside from more fashionable gear, hopefully we can expect less cultural appropriation. From Canada's closing ceremony graffiti splash jean jacket to the ban of political and protest messaging, it is evident that hip hop fashion has the ability to play an interesting role within the Olympics. While listening to this speaker series, I can't help but think about how this research relates to the other presentations throughout this year. I think back to the first session and how speakers were questioning whether or not breaking should be in the Olympics in the first place, and how this actually is similar to my research question of wondering if there is space for hip hop fashion within the Olympics, or the idea of cultural hegemony that was brought up during a discussion period. Could Olympic uniforms be a symbol of this hegemony? I think back to the session on injury prevention. Throughout that session, I was thinking about which sneakers and clothing are best for injury prevention, or even when it comes to judging. Although I don't think clothing has a large influence, I can think of battles I attended where the host pointed out all the matching logos of a b-boy's outfit, getting the crowd cheering more for this b-boy with the matching logos. And then I think, does cheering affect judging, or did cheering make him improve his dancing? I don't really know, but I think it's evident that breaking fashion and clothing choices can connect to many of the broader conversations around breaking in the Olympics. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacqueline. Does anyone have any questions for Jacqueline? I have a few minutes before we go into our next talk.
I could ask something.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. It was super interesting because I was also a few years ago thinking a little bit about fashion and how the fashion changed for B-girls. For example, how when I started, it was totally not possible to wear like tight clothing. And then a little bit later, there was like the trend coming from USA where the B-girls were wearing like tight pants. Mm-hmm. And it kind of like changed the whole thing. So I was wondering always how the fashion is connected also to mainstream fashion, because I think it definitely also is. And the second thing I was also thinking about, you were talking how you want to wear appropriate in practice, but also you want to wear like a B-girl outside of practice. Like it creates also some kind of like fashion identity. And I had the same when I was younger, but when I grew older and I was in breaking for maybe 10 years, suddenly it started to become not important for me to be recognized as a B-girl later. And now I feel like I don't even pay attention in my everyday styling if it has any connection to hip hop. It clearly does, but it's because the style is always like connected, but I don't need to be recognized as B-girl outside of my breaking, you know. So I was wondering if you take this thing of like how long dancers are in the game and this thing of aging inside the consideration.
I wasn't thinking about that in terms of my research, but I feel like the past couple of years I'm beginning that phase of like not wanting to look like a B-girl so much in everyday life. So it's interesting to hear that you have the same experience. I'm like, oh, I'm just on a track. But I think with the clothing for B-girls specifically, and like whether it's tight or loose, like I feel like it does have a bit to do with gender and breaking and like sexualization of bodies. Like I feel like where it's a male dominated dance form first, I guess for me and some other B girls I've talked to, like first when you go into it, you don't want your body to be seen as much. I haven't noticed so much that clothes that are tighter now within the Toronto breaking community, but I definitely see that when I'm scrolling through my Instagram. Like sometimes you see like jeans and a crop top. And I haven't looked at that in terms of my research, but I'm very interested. So thank you.
Thanks, Frida. And we have time for one more question if anyone has any questions. There will be more time, of course, at the end of all three talks, but a few more minutes if anyone wants to ask Jacqueline anything now.
Or I saw Rockefeller, you had a comment. I don't know if you want to pop on and share it or.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for Jacqueline for that presentation. It was awesome. It got me thinking. I wrote a lot of notes, but I'll probably have questions later. And I just wanted to answer that. When breaking was coming back in New York City, it was still like big pants, big shirts, big, kind of swishy type of athletic, tracksuits we were wearing. So we were just following the trend. But breaking did have tight jeans at the beginning and tights. Because that was the style, but the denim back then was just denim. And it was like, I give a lot of respect and props to the guys for like rocking and doing windmills and all that stuff with tight jeans, Lee jeans in particular, who are like so stiff. And then, we would like sew on a permanent crease to make it even tighter, so I give a lot of respect to them, but the style was definitely big pants. And then like mid 90s, like the denim started to have spandex and elastic fiber in it. So, I definitely wanted to wear tight pants. And when I finally felt like I had enough moves and vocabulary to have respect in the circle for my moves, I started wearing tight pants. And a lot of other, the style started to change just in general in hip hop, not just for breaking. And so I realized that, okay, this is comfortable. I can actually do footwork without feeling, and interrupted or whatever. So I just wanted to say that, yeah, depending on the B-girl and why she's there and what she's going through in her life, her journey, her walk, she's free to, come as she is, come as you are. But the tight pants, I think it's always been there. It was there from the 70s, from the 80s. So I just added that just to, but great presentation, Jacqueline. I'm still bubbling. You so.
Thanks, Rockefeller. Quick Step has a quick question.
I see what you did there. A quick question.
Got me.
Rock me that. Okay, can you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you're going to do great work, by the way. Loved it. I think fashion is really important, and we always talk about that in New York City. That being said, we be doing research according to the region. I know somebody just typed in here and said that fashion and with the B-girls was inspired by New York City. I think it's definitely traditional. I think B-boys and B-girls go with the times. What was fresh back then is a different fresh now. And then it's cyclical, right? Sometimes people are like, oh, I want to wear what they used to wear back then. And then it becomes very traditional in the sense of almost like, what Native Indians would wear. I think people wear now like, oh, I got a pair of Lees and Adidas and fat laces. Where'd you find those? You know what I mean? And then maybe that's will go around. Or you'll find B-boys in Air Jordans, the latest, sweats and hoodie. But what they have in Germany, what they have in Africa, what they have in Asia is totally different. but the standard is fresh all the way around. You have to be fresh, crispy. What does that look like in every region? And I wonder if you would do research like that for every region, because every region has a different sense of style. And now that the world is universally hip hop in a bigger sense, what would that look like? I think that would be interesting.
For this research specifically.
I can't hear you.
Oh, can anyone else hear me? Oh, okay.
I got you.
Okay, for this research specifically, I was planning to interview the 4 B-boys and B-girls from Canada who are going to the Olympics. But lately I've been thinking maybe that's not enough interviews. So if it ends up this being the Canadian B-boys and B-girls for this research specifically, then it will focus more on the Canadian breaking scene and what fashion looks like there.
That's cool. You could probably start small, you know, like what are those 4 breakers dressed like in their different towns? Because I know in New York, Brooklyn dress is different from the Bronx, Staten Island, and Manhattan. And that alone is interesting. So when you went to a jam, you could tell different crews, like different tribes, by the colors they wore and the way they wore it. Even in Brooklyn, different neighborhoods, because you know what I mean? So that might be interesting, and you can expand on that. So yeah, good luck on that. It's great work, and that was my question. And yeah, it's fascinating to watch someone else's interpretation or study about what's happening. So good luck on your journey.
Thank you.
Thanks, Quick.
Hello,
Thanks, Jacqueline, as well. We might have to just move on just for time for now to the next presentation. If you have any questions, chuck them in the chat and we'll get back to them at the end in our Q&A. So next up, we have Emile Jansen. Emile started b-boying in 1982. He founded the musical outfit Black Noise in 1988 and Heal the Hood project in 1998, which won the Best Hip Hop Organization in 2010. With a teaching background, he brought education to South African hip hop in 1993 with the Library Tour. His crew placed 3rd at the 1997 Battle of the Year, and he has released over 13 albums with Black Noise and 13 solo albums, 1 AfriCups soundtrack, has featured on 9 compilation albums and helped others do the same. Emile has also recently co-edited Never Again, Hip Hop Art, Activism and Education in Post-Apartheid South Africa with Sami Alim, Dr. Adam Hopt and Quentin Williams as well. I hope I didn't miss anything, Emile. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, just pointing out how old I am with all of these things that you, that you mentioned. I'm wanting to share something, but I'm struggling. I'm picking up someone else's screen in the process. Can I try and do that? Still getting someone else's.
Do you know what the screen says, just so I can kind of...
Just it's somebody's iPod or iPhone or whatever. Okay, now I found it. It's okay, thanks. All right, so first of all, thanks for the opportunity to share with you guys. I'm kind of nervous. I don't like, I'm more of a performer than this, but anyway, so you said most of the things about what I do with Heal the Hood Project, a hip hop cultural education NGO from Cape Town. I grew up during apartheid, was chased by and shot at by the Supreme South African Police and Army, yeah, for asking for equality. And so ironically, today, I'm suggesting that we work towards economic equality as well, as far as this Olympic and IOC and World Dance Sports Federation's involvement with breaking. A friend of mine actually warned me against saying too much, but some of us are pushed by our ancestry to speak truth to power, and so I'm going to do that because I don't really give a damn what they think. So for me, you know, the terminology and where we are as a result of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, neocolonialism, capitalism on steroids, thanks to anti-social media. And so those just seem like a lot of academic empty words, but actually they imply genocide, mass murder, land theft, rape, theft of natural resources, just to name a few of those. And friend was saying, now they're going to tell you to forget the past, but, you know, try telling the Jewish community that they won't allow you to forget, you know. And so Black people and African people specifically need to do the same. And so, you know, you see that the devastation that has taken place with COVID makes people say, oh, just let's get the money, let's get paid. But, you know, it's ironic that the economically poor were actually affected the hardest by COVID. So a lot of what's happening in the world, we don't see the connection to the past, which is extremely important that we never forget, you know, that we always keep this in mind. Yeah, and so I must say that, you know, they say it is a force traveling in a specific direction will continue in that direction unless an equal and opposite force is applied. And apartheid and racism and colonialism and slavery continues to I mean, we saw with Black Lives Matter last year that it's still a global issue, and so we have to do something about it. And the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing, and then be surprised when you end up with the same result. And so for me, it's important to speak out against this. And this year I celebrate 40 years of being an activist and artist, a member of South Africa's oldest hip hop group, Black Noise. You might remember from third place at Battle of the Year 1997, which seems like forever ago right now. But yeah, we host many events where we actually raise the money for flights, visas, and in some cases accommodation. Thus far, we've raised money for more than 250 practitioners to travel to international events. So we understand the collective economic power that we have as a community without the help from sponsors. And we've sent people to, Battle of the Year, R16, Floor Wars, Trinity International Hip Hop Festival, and the DMC World DJ Championships. The topic of breaking the normalization of appropriation of hip hop culture was to show that the majority of the money is actually generated from hip hop culture and dance remain in the hands of the organization at the top of the pyramid, almost a reversed upside down pyramid, and the trickle down of economic change for the practitioners and dancers and artists is very limited. There's very limited trickle down of that money. And interviewed numerous dancers and dance teachers for this paper, and there was this huge amount of fear amongst them to speak out of their relationship with dance studios, the owners, the advertising agencies, international film crews that came to film in South Africa, and the local WDSF governing body. They're very afraid to speak out openly, which yeah, it's actually quite sad that is the situation. And they also don't like talking about how much they earned, ironically. And you can definitely see that they were warned by their parents in pursuing art as a career, because which is ironic, because in my basic research of the economics, in the last 20 years, hip hop made $260 billion US, right? And these dancers keep using the repeated cliches of get a real job, I'm a struggling artist, have a backup plan, which is typical of how parents tell their children to prepare if you're going to be an artist. And as I said, it's definitely seemed like there's a upside down pyramid, and I try to show this in this presentation over here. So if you look at the three things that I touched on, you've got hip hop industry for the last 20 years raised a total of 261 billion. I gave the sources that I got, and I just searched randomly online. I'm not a mathematician, so bear with me. The collective money made by our top MCs, and someone, I don't know why this guy chose 99, but 99 of them raised actually around about between 13.7 and 20 billion. Now, if you look at the amount above, that's 261 billion generated by the industry, the music industry. That shows that the industry walked away with 247.2 billion. So the artists only made 5.2, even though we all praise Jay-Z and Kanye West for being billionaires. This is the reality of the discrepancy between the top of the pyramid and those at the bottom. Then when it comes to the Olympics generated in 2020, even though it was in COVID, 15.4 billion. The IOC on their website claimed to give 3.4 million every day And so I multiplied it by 365 days, which is 1.2 billion times 4, because it's every 4 years. So it's 4.9 billion. They have a staff of 500 people, apparently. And also, if you look at the amount on top, which is 15.4, and you look at the amount below, which works out to about 5 or so, there's like 10 billion that is used for staffing and for the running the organization. The president of the IOC in 2015, I think his name is Thomas Bach, he earns $252,832 a year. And then I looked at the athletes, the top 10 athletes, the 20% of the top 10 athletes get 50,000. 50% of them get less than 15,000, so they probably work another job, right? And then also, if you look at the athlete in comparison to the president, they get 6.1%. And so anyway, so that then I also looked at the World Dance Sport Federation in the United States specifically, because that data was available. It says that there are 54,627 registered dance studios, and the salary of the owner of the dance studio is $40,040 per year. And so all I did was multiply the number of dance studios by the income of the owner, and it works out to $2,351,583,000. And so I also looked at the salary of the president of the World Dance Sport Federation. And this was, again, he said he'd take a cut in his salary. Instead of taking 60,000 Swiss francs, he took 40 this year. But that's the amount that they approved, which is 64,446.90 per year, which ironically 64446 is Nelson Mandela's number, prison number. Anyway, just a bit of added trivia. The freelance hip hop dancer, and I use this example because most of the b-boys or the hip hop dancers that go and work in these studios, they get paid $35 for an hour and a half session. And so I multiplied that by 5 sessions per week times 4 weeks times 12, and got an amount of 8,400. And that was in the US. In South Africa, from the people I spoke to, each one earns 2,000 Rand times 12, which gives you 24,000. It's 1,560 US dollars per year. And then also it works out to 13.3 in the US. And so you see the pyramid where the trickle down is actually very ridiculous. And all of this information is online. And my intention is to show this information, to show the huge amount of money that is available, but the trickle down to the practitioners, the content creators of the rap industry, the Olympics, the WDSF, most of the CEOs, the executives, industry, the presidents, the board members of the IOC, those people, majority of them are white. And while the practitioners and the innovators and the creators are Black, African, or people of color. Yeah? And hip-hop dancers from economically poorer communities or areas have spent and I say huge because, you know, for them, it's a huge amount of money to attend these classes, participate, and then they also have to pay for their flights to participate in these international competitions. And every year I get calls because they know I send the kids for free for Battle of the Year. So they ask me to help out, right? And then this money is actually gathered from a community where the household income is $3,210.63 per year. So a lot of these young dancers forego the opportunity to represent the country. And I put up this picture because this is one of the teams, and you can find many more. This is the South African team. And you can see one kid out of this lot is actually a person of color. And so my fear is that if you look at it, white population in South Africa is 8.9% of the population, but they make up 90% of this team. My fear is that hip hop dance and now breaking, both under the banner of the WDSF, will become more and more economically exclusive, making these opportunities like the 2024 Olympics economically unattainable, which is ironic because during apartheid, Black people were excluded because of race, and now they're basically being excluded because of economic apartheid. While promoting young b-boying in South Africa, I realized that there are many people that I can give you examples of whose lives have changed forever, you know, and actually saved their lives from being involved in like potentially gang, drug, and other social ills. But these big bodies, and they don't really care about those realities that the dancers have to experience. They seem not to care or nor to understand these communities which the dancers come from. Breaking, ironically, was actually created by Black people or people of color to solve these social issues for themselves. And ironically, its controllers handed over to organizations interested in not interested in understanding these communities, but to have an extractionist like economic agenda. And I say this because in the vision of the World Dance Sport Federation, it says this: promote the sport for the strength, on the strength of greater constituencies, so numbers they're looking at, of the broadest demographic, and usually demographic is a euphemism for including people of color, other numbers, and for the benefit of arising from economy of scale, profit. So it clearly doesn't show any desire to actually help those communities out of the situations they find themselves in. I also included this oath that you say at the Olympics, which is we promise to take part in these Olympic Games, respecting and abiding by the rules and the spirit of fair play, inclusion, and equality. Together we stand in solidarity and commit ourselves to sport without doping, without cheating, without any form of discrimination. Now you look at the Olympics, they've been around for 126 years and it's never been hosted in Africa. I don't know how inclusive that is. The World Dance Sports Federation has been around for 65 years. They've only been able to get affiliates in 7 of the 54 African countries. If you look at the statement of solidarity amidst accusations of the Chinese genocide against the Uyghur population, yet the Olympics is taking place in China at the moment. And so this is a picture I thought I'd throw it in of South Africa's reaction to Athens winning the Olympic bid in 2004. The guy's actually saying your masa, which is your mother's beep, beep, beep. And economically wealthy countries have larger numbers of participants, both at the Olympics and at the WDSF championships. Thus, economics cannot be ignored as a determining factor for participation and inclusivity. Both the IOC and the WDSF are based in Europe with headquarters in Switzerland, the 5th economically richest country in the world. The IOC and the WDSF cannot begin to understand the realities of people who created hip hop culture, hip hop dance, or breaking. They need to include Black people or people of color from these struggling communities to be part of the organizational team to gain the skills and govern themselves, empower the very communities and artists more than the already wealthy organizations. In closing, I want to say that I want to comment on the slogan breaking for gold. I'm from South Africa, one of the biggest gold mining countries in the world. Our country's gold has been extracted or stolen by the descendants of colonial land theft, and most of South Africans have never held or can afford the gold. The pioneers of hip hop dance and hip hop culture have been extracted or stolen from Africa and taken as slaves to enrich the European and American elite and their countries. I've watched academia extract or steal information from these hip hop breaking education pioneers for their thesis, their doctorates, and never rewarding the practitioners with the same accolades of giving them a doctorate for the information. They encode these lessons in exclusionary language and place it in economically exclusive academic silos like universities, removed from the very people that birthed these ideas. I hope that the gold-plated silver medal does not extract we the people from our collective power. I end in the voices of my ancestors, Amandlawe, to power to the people. Tawatamakamske, the struggle continues. Kai Gangans, big thanks. I'm done.
Fantastic presentation, Emil. That was amazing and a very critical piece for our conversation. We have a few minutes for a few questions. I'm sure there are some people looking to ask questions in the chat. Lots of props out here. That's great. Does anyone have a question for Emil?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, quick step, please.
Peace, brother. How you doing, man?
Hey.
So I've definitely been met with resistance when it comes to these topics. why are you asking? You know, you got to go for yours. You got to get your own. I'm like, that's not why we created this. And, you know, asking to be a part of something is like asking the Nicholas brothers to be part of a tap convention. They don't need to ask. They should be honored. I mean, yeah, they don't need to ask. They should be invited. They should be honored because they worked hard to get there. Have you been met with the same kind of resistance where you live when you feel that you're not included in the conversation that you know you can lend a voice to? And how do you deal with that?
I've actually excluded myself from the governing body within South Africa because of the threats that that people have thrown in my direction, you know. And the reason I stepped out because I realized what we're up against, you know. I've seen this happen before, and so I don't see, unless there are more voices globally that are saying similar things, we are going to find that we're going to look at b-boying or breaking at the Olympics like we look at rock and roll, you know. And rock and roll used to be Black people's music, you know. And so that is one of my biggest fears, that people are looking at what we're saying as being that we're standing in the way of progress, when in actual fact the true progress is about inclusivity. It's about the sharing of skills and the sharing of economics, and remembering that Europe and America has taken a lot of that economics from countries around the world, and to fix it you have to put back to solve the problem. And that's why I mentioned the money, because at the same time they have us believing that speaking about money is something that is wrong. You know, and it's also something that is a distraction, that we are in it for the love, the passion, which we are, but like, you know, people need to live and to put food on the table, and the practitioners shouldn't be the ones that suffer, or the people that put the you know, we supply the entertainment. You know what I mean? If without us, without the masses of the people, the money is actually accumulated from the people, and that's the problem we don't see. I'm actually doing a talk tomorrow at this hip hop gathering where I'm trying to get us to see that the circle has the power. You know, we forgot that the circle has the power. Our attention has been focused by the light. The light shines on the circle in the middle, but we give the power to that person in the middle. And so I'm trying to get us to almost decenter this idea of the circle and look at ourselves and the power we actually have, you know, to change all of this. Because we've done this long before they were here. You know, we've had events all over the world ourselves. So it's necessary for us to remember the power we had, and enforce that power again. But definitely I've been told to retract certain things that I've said by members of the WDSF. When I started hosting Battle of the Year, I was called by their members to desist, to stop hosting the event, because who gave me the right to host a b-boy event or a hip-hop event? And they didn't even know what hip-hop was. But they called me. They were so entitled that they called me to tell me that I shouldn't be hosting this event because I have to ask the global body for permission. Can you believe that? For permission to host something that we innovated and brought to South Africa initially, as people of color. And so, you know, I understand that. And I was told by, and I'm not going to say who he is, but it's American b-boy who told me, "Oh, watch what you say, because these Chinese and these academics."
Yeah, they're very, very scared.
Yeah.
It's interesting when they say, "Who gave you the right?" And what would have happened if you actually gave them an answer? If it was someone from their side. "Oh, your president gave me the right, so thanks." But more power to you, brother. Thank you
Thanks
for
so
your
much.
presentation. Thank you, everybody, for.
We have time for maybe one more comment or question. Does anyone have anything for Emile that they'd like to say before we move on? And there'll be more time again in the section after. MiRi, do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, it's not very well thought out, but I just want to thank you for a really powerful presentation. It's really important. And I'm just really glad that we could have you as part of the speaker series and contributing your knowledge and your research. And it made me think about I've been reading a bit about the modern Olympics, so the emergence of the Olympics in the 1890s. And it's confirming everything you're saying about the roots of the Olympics in terms of, you know, it was a gentleman's club. It was for mostly Europeans.
Yeah.
If there were other countries representative, it was colonial places where it was, you know, gentlemen or upper class people in white people in different countries mostly participating in that way. So it seems to be right in tune with that kind of thinking, but the historical roots, we haven't got that far away. It doesn't seem from your research that it's moved in a more equitable direction in a lot of ways. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I was extremely excited about the possibilities that it could have and still could have, because at the same time, if you have a global attention, and especially that we were made aware of this when we were in the midst of this like Black Lives Matter conversation. And so for me, it's like I actually, and it's the reason I wrote this book, Reconnect the String. You know, it's like this is all of the elements of hip hop are connected to First Nation people, from the circle to the loop cyclic drone that exists, which is essentially the loop of the DJ or the break, to the trance dance, the b-boy, to the writing on the rock, the graffiti artist, so, or sorry, to Phase 2 would kick my ass if I said that, the aerosol artist. And so for me, it's like the importance of remembering that this is who we are as human beings, as a form of expression that comes from who we've always been. But there's a beautiful opportunity for people in China and people in Europe to realize that African people of African descent manifested this culture. And so giving back that sense of self-worth or that sense of worth to Black lives, because Black lives are actually African lives, actually lives of people of color who are originated on the African continent. But what do we know about Africa in order for us to give them equality, you know, to give them that sense of respect that everyone else gets because of the content of education at the moment? And only way to change that is to supply information that gives people an understanding why Black lives actually matter, you know. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emil. We'll have more time for questions after the final presentation. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and we'll get back around to them in our collective Q&A. Up next, we have Sonia Chamele. Sonia trained at the Northern School of Contemporary Dance, gaining a Bachelor of Performing Arts and Dance. Following injuries, she qualified as a podiatrist, earning her Bachelor of Science from the University of Wales. She's been awarded a Master of Science in Sport and Exercise Rehabilitation from St. Mary's University, where she later lectured on both undergraduate and postgraduate sports rehabilitation courses. Her dance research has been published in the Journal of American Podiatric Medical Association and Journal of Dance Medicine and Science. She was a member of the London 2012 Olympic Games medical team and a guest of the Jamaican Athletes Association of the 2014 Jamaican Invitational Athletics Meet, and she's also co-founded Soul Footwork Dance. I hope I didn't miss anything, Sonia. You want to take it away?
I think you got everything. I'm just trying to share my screen. But I'm having problem with sharing the screen. Hang on. Oh dear. Sorry about this, guys.
No, no problem.
Sorry, I can't see to get it working there.
Sonia, I could, oh, there.
Okay.
I could also try to make you a host. I don't know if that would change any, I'm not sure what the.
Oh, hang on, let me be. Sorry, I can't.
Is it a PowerPoint or?
It is PowerPoint, yeah.
I wonder if you could also email it to Jason and I, and then we could share it. We could try to share it that way, or get it going.
I mean, I'm happy to just talk through it, to be honest with you, if we can't get the share screen. I'll just see if there's another way. For some reason, it's not wanting to do it. Just check. Yeah, apologies for that. For some reason, it's not wanting to load. I think for the sake of time, it's probably best if I just sort of crack on and sort of get talking. So essentially, really, first of all, thank you to MiRi and to Jason for inviting me to take part in the speaker series today. It's been a really great series so far, and it's really wonderful to see that this research community is really thriving. And thank you also for the introduction, Jason, and also to Emily and Jacqueline for their presentations today. And I think there's certain amounts of crossover a little bit with what I'll be discussing today. So essentially, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the context of how breaking, which has come from such a strong cultural foundation, can sit within the context of mainstream sport. And as part of the original research that I undertook for the article, I reviewed how other sports from very strong cultural backgrounds have fared once they've been adopted into the Olympic movement, essentially. And this essentially will be the focus of today's presentation. So I'm going to begin by giving a very brief context to the history of competitive dance, and then we'll review the history of alternative sports and the Olympic Games before discussing in more detail how these other Olympic subcultures that have been adopted into the Olympic Games, how they have fared, and essentially what lessons can we learn as a community. So essentially the concept of dance within formally organised sport is not a new thing. It's certainly been recognised and reported as early as the 1920s in Europe, if not before that. And there are a number of federations and committees that have developed over the decades, essentially to put the concept of dance as sport very much at the forefront of their agenda. History has therefore clearly demonstrated that whilst dance in all its forms is essentially an art, this doesn't necessarily negate it from being able to sit within the world of competition and within the world of sport quite successfully. But what gives it both added flavour, as it were, and added complexity is that it has this cultural identity, and essentially, certainly with breaking, it is part of that wider tapestry, as it were, of hip hop, and that has this very strong cultural roots. And it's very foundational to hip hop and to breaking, obviously. So whilst the hip hop community has certainly embraced the competitive and the battle context and concept of not just breaking, but other genres of dance within the wider hip hop community, it's also important to understand how and why breaking has been adopted essentially into the biggest sporting arena on the planet. I think it's also pertinent to have an awareness of the journey that other alternative cultures have experienced along the way, because I think there is certainly evidence of pitfalls. And I think the more we understand and the more the knowledge we can gain from those that have gone before us, then obviously it will help to minimize us repeating those same mistakes and pitfalls. So with regards to alternative sports and the Olympic movement, certainly for some time it was becoming very apparent that youth participation in traditional sports was decreasing. And certainly there was a report in following the Sydney 2000 Olympics that there was a 50% reduction in age 18 to 34 viewing figures, 18 to 34-year-olds actually watching the sports. And so the Olympic movement was very, very much tasked with finding a way to remain very relevant for contemporary youth. And in comparison to the reduced participation in traditional sports, there was this significant element of youth engagement in alternative sports, such as snowboarding, skateboarding, BMX. And these were particularly attractive to young people because of the alternative, individualistic and anti-establishment philosophies that went with those subcultures. And these alternative cultural activities are also defined very much by the fact that they're not mainstream. And some would actually argue that they're anti-mainstream. But importantly, they had this pre-existing subculture to which participants were very much able to connect. And the growth of events like the X Games was essentially sufficient to demonstrate to the IOC that they'd potentially found their golden ticket. They'd found their solution to these waning youth audiences. But however, their integration into the Olympic movement would nonetheless remain both complex and very contentious at times. So how does breaking fit into this? Essentially, the inaugural Youth Olympic Games was in Singapore in 2010. And this was really formed to encourage youth engagement, and breaking was one of a number of new sports which made its debut in 2018 in Buenos Aires at the Youth Olympic Games. And much to the success of it, it has now, obviously, as we know, been adopted into the programme for Paris 2024. And I think it's important to consider, in particular, another sport that has had a longer journey. And I think it's quite apt that we're about to start the Winter Olympics in a couple of days' time. So snowboarding made its Olympic debut in 1998 in the Winter Olympics in Nagano. And it shares some similarities with breaking. Obviously, it's fundamentally quite different, but there certainly are some commonalities in that it emerged in the late 60s, early 70s in North America, and it very much went against the expensive mainstream grain and activity of skiing, and it offered an alternative, strong cultural ideology, which is based in freedom of self-expression. And there are obviously some crossovers then with breaking. Now, snowboarding has navigated the process of mainstream commercialization whilst maintaining its cultural essence with some success, not complete, but certainly with some. And some people would argue that much of that success is due to the fact that the participants had recognized their value to the Olympic regime, and which in turn, they then used that value and that sense of value to negotiate their cultural identity within the movement. For example, and this relates back to Jacqueline's presentation earlier, by recognition of national uniforms that would be worn. So 24 years on, snowboarding is now a firm staple and a fan favourite in the Olympics, which we'll no doubt get to witness further at the Beijing Winter Olympics in the coming days. And for those of us that will be watching, I think it's pertinent to sort of pay attention to snowboarding and considering where we would like potentially breaking to be in 24 years' time. So what can we learn from their journey? So key is the judging and the judging systems. And I know that that was touched on, I think, at the last episode of this series. And both the judging and judging criteria have very much played a significant role in the evolution of snowboarding. And those essentially who set the criteria for judging and for breaking, along with the judges, they will ultimately define an athlete's position, they will define who is awarded gold, and thus they will directly influence on what is deemed the best aesthetic qualities within the sport. And that has a filter down trickle effect. And like breaking, snowboarding was primarily peer judged, and however its transition into the mainstream means that judges must follow criteria to reduce their subjective bias, as will the breaking judges as well. But the pressure from audiences also exists. So particularly audience that are unfamiliar with the nuances of breaking, it will be the same as what has occurred previously with audiences that were unfamiliar with the nuances of snowboarding. And particularly the result of that for snowboarding was that acrobatic movements, very spectacular tricks were very much promoted, and that promoted greater risk taking. And therefore, in terms of breaking, we have to consider not necessarily that mainstreaming will result in the evolution of breaking, because a natural evolution will occur regardless of elite down to amateur, as it were, because dancers will continue to express themselves, tell their stories, and that will imprint itself on this bigger, wider tapestry of breaking and the wider tapestry essentially of hip hop. But we do need to also consider that there is that possibility that mainstreaming will shift the focus of the evolution a little bit, in that what will appear more attractive to viewing audiences, so power moves, as it were, versus maybe more subtle creative nuance. And so that can then shift what people will train and want to do. That then has a knock-on effect further down to injury risk, injury profile. And certainly with snowboarding, this search for dramatic acrobatics has resulted in a significant rise in traumatic snowboard injury among both elite and amateur participants who are attempting to emulate their heroes as such, and who may or who may not have access to adequate training resources. So this perpetual aim to push the acrobatic and the athletic boundaries has also been met with some disdain from some members of the snowboarding community, who place greater value on style and expression in connection to the sport's cultural heritage. Now, the Trivium judging system for breaking is quite a unique comparative tool, and it highlights this interrelationship between mind, body, and soul. And from my understanding, the way that this system has been developed, there is an element of safeguarding against this bias. However, this will certainly be an area of future interesting research, and certainly something that I will hope to investigate and monitor as things progress over the coming years. Alongside that, we also have to consider the concept of a very regimented training and competition schedule and environments, which in some respects is conflicting to many of the philosophies of both snowboarding and hip hop culture and breaking. And a good example of this from snowboarding was the snowboarder Lindsay Jacobellis. She's an American snowboarder who took part in the 2006 Turin Winter Games. And she was in the final of the border cross. And she was in the gold medal position. And on the final stages of the race, she attempted an unnecessary maneuver and she fell. And she lost the gold, essentially. A huge media negative backlash ensued, with people demanding an explanation for this so-called stunt. And her explanation was very simple, in that she was having fun and she wanted to share that. Now, this response was supported by many people within the boarding community, but it was equally met with further criticism by mainstream media and mainstream audiences, who perceived this as evidence that boarding was incompatible with the Olympic ideology of playing to win, as opposed to playing for fun. Now, it does not require a vast stretch of the imagination to envisage a very similar scenario occurring in breaking, where a dancer's focus could very much shift more to focusing on that feeling, that element of soul of being lost within that moment, rather than the clarity of thinking, I must execute this maneuver in order to win and get the gold medal. So we have to consider, how does peace, love, unity, and having fun sit within the Olympic motto of faster, stronger, higher, together? So along with these more regimented training environments comes the performance team as well, which may include coaches, physios, physiologists, nutritionists, performance analysts, whose aim is to help the individual and help that individual achieve podium success ultimately. And however, it has been argued that the addition of such a team can have a mixed impact. And whilst the benefits are clear, the negative can be that an increased sense of pressure from the athlete for the athlete to deliver these medals, whether that's in snowboarding or breaking, it then takes away that element where snowboarding or breaking for us is that place of feeling home, that place that gives you that sense of freedom. So breaking really has the potential for this negative pressure to manifest, where training alongside peers, such as crew members, becomes sacrificed for training in a more controlled regime, where the greater emphasis is placed on winning rather than on self-expression and creativity. So it's therefore critical that performance teams have an appreciation for the cultural roots of the dance in order to minimize this negative pressure. So finally, really, considerations for the inclusion of breaking within the Olympic Games. There is the potential for significant positives here, and not least of which is the increased participation levels and subsequent investment in infrastructure, hopefully, which is something that can be linked to Olympic involvement and which filters hopefully across the levels and areas of the sport. But this will also filter down to hopefully increased research and understanding of breaking and breaking related injury from the wider medical community. As more people are doing the activity, more people will therefore be presenting to healthcare professionals, so therefore their understanding has to increase and research will increase. So generally, whilst there is the potential for significant financial gain on both an individual and industry level, and this can be beneficial, and commercialism and sponsorship deals are part of that, but there can be also negatives to the inclusion, and some of which have been touched on previously, but the potential to focus on athletic prowess over the artistic qualities is certainly one, and the loss of cultural context is another. And certainly with regards to recommendations going forward, a very mature judging system with mature judging criteria will be paramount, and it will help to safeguard against some of these negatives. And certainly the trivium judging system is unique, and I think it's a particularly interesting judging tool, and it has the potential to minimize some of these negatives, but time will tell, essentially. Involvement of the community at all levels and continued support for infrastructure development is also key. So really, just to conclude, breaking is unique and it sits within this wider culture of hip hop. It's interwoven into this tapestry, but we can also learn from other cultures that have gone before us and tread a similar path, and we can heed some of the lessons from that to ensure that this art form and this platform doesn't negate from us, and that it can be more positive, hopefully. And in terms of future areas of research and interest for myself, certainly looking at how the judging system impacts breaking, and how it impacts the community and how it impacts the dance and injury profile, etc., is something that I will hope to be looking at in further research further down the line. So that's everything. So thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. That was great. A really interesting comparison. And yeah, it is very interesting to hear about the pitfalls of the other cultural activities that have come before and how they've been indoctrinated and institutionalized into mainstream culture and mainstream institutions. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Sonia?
Hi, this is Rockefeller. Awesome presentation, Sonia. Thank you so much for all your research and everything. It still gave me a lot to think. I took a lot of notes, but I just wanted to ask you if you thought that this digital transition that has happened due to COVID has affected other sports like the skateboarding or snowboarding, the way that it has affected, and I don't mean to say affected, the way it has become the other way to exist in breaking, because there are e-battles and there are apps where you can battle each other on the phone without having to come together and gather. So I was just wondering, has the skateboarding community also turned into this as well? Because I don't know what they're doing, and if that's adding to this separation of culture and the way it's usually done and then the way it's about to be done. Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you. I think first off, I'm not sure is my original answer, but I think certainly looking back historically, the use of social media has played a huge role in the development of snowboarding becoming mainstream, because if we think that it sort of burst onto the mainstream stage back in 1998, it sort of coincided with the development of social media. So what you had was you have less people, you know, turning up for a specific lesson and learning, you know, in a traditional way how to do things, but people start to emulate what they see on videos, and then they post what they're doing on social media. And so things get spread, and that influences the trend, that influences the style, it influences what is done. And it also has influenced and increased injury rates, because you have people trying things that they wouldn't have tried before, because now it's much easier to compete against someone and to demonstrate this trick without perhaps having the resources to practice and train within a safe environment. And I think what the pandemic in a way has done has almost fine-tuned that again for everyone, because obviously with something like snowboarding, you really need to be near a mountain to do it, you know. So whereas the joy and the lucky thing that we have with hip hop dance genres and breaking, you know, in particular, is that it can pretty much be done anywhere. So you don't necessarily have to find that training space as such. You can just get in and do it. And maybe you're trying to recreate things in spaces and try things that you're not perhaps necessarily physically ready to do. And that certainly goes along with what has historically happened with snowboarding. So I guess to answer your question, whilst the research I don't think is perhaps quite there yet to say, yes, it definitely has affected things from snowboarding, skateboarding with regards to the pandemic, I would say that certainly the hints were there that previously over the last 20 years, that has been happening to a certain extent with snowboarding anyway. And certainly I think it's happening, we can see it's happened essentially with breaking, and that there are competitions everywhere online. And so anyone can compete anywhere, but then, you know, there are negatives to that. There are positives, but there can be negatives too. I hope that answers the question.
You did. Thank you. Thank you so much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Just for the purposes of time, we're going to move now to our next part, but thank you so much, Sonia, for a fantastic presentation, and the comparison was really vital and useful, so thank you for sharing your research. We've invited MiRi Park to be the respondent today. When I saw that the three talks, I thought were very different in terms of the topics, but actually ended up having a lot of synergies in the end. But I thought, who could do that? Who could grapple with all three topics and do a fantastic job? So I've tasked MiRi with this. MiRi Park is a B-girl, choreographer, performer, producer, scholar, activist, teacher, and mother based in Southern California. She reps New York City, where she spent her formative adult years and learned the art of B-girling and other hip hop and club dance styles. Her scholarship brings to bear all aspects of her career, which spans underground dance, competitive studio dance, commercial dance, musical theater, and teaching in academic institutional spaces. Park is a lecturer at CSU Channel Islands and is currently a doctoral student at the UCLA World Arts and Cultures Dance Department, where she focuses on Asian American corporealities in hip hop dance. She's the recipient of the UCR Christina Lindbergh Schlent Lecture Series in Dance Studies and CSU Faculty Innovation and Leadership Awards. She's got a BFA Dance, a BA in Journalism, UMass Amherst, MA American Studies, and Columbia University. So a lot of titles there. And MiRi's been around for a long time. If you're in the hip hop community in North America, you know her very well. And so MiRi, take it away.
Thank you so much. I tried to sort of condense all of my thoughts, but they might be a little all over the place, but I was like writing on the spot. So first off, I just want to give props to MiRi and Jason and also Hannah for producing the series and curating these panels with these that include the wide-ranging perspectives of our panelists today. And secondly, I am honored to share this space with each of you who are here in the virtual space from all over the world in this gathering. In thinking about what it means that the modern Olympics was conceived as a civilizing project to recruit newly modernized nations into the global market, and also that every single aspect of the Olympics, from the expansion of corporate sponsorships to corporate media, to monetized teaching and coaching, to the influx of capital, to the sponsoring cities, I think it's incredibly important to center that as a way to understand all three of these topics. And I also think that is crucially important to have these conversations to mobilize what hip hop culture can do to resist and also challenge and also broaden what we want the Olympics to do for breaking and hip hop culture, not just what breaking can do for the Olympics, which is the initial push to include it, right? But everything that we talk about today is about expanding capital, increasing capital value, and also how much capital can people accrue. So first of all, I think, just starting at the beginning, Jacqueline, I think all of us who found our way into breaking from the outside, right, as I have as well, have also been captivated by the clear fashion of what, B-boys and B-girls rock to adorn themselves, to signal our participation in the culture. And then the functionality of the fashion becomes much clearer as you continue practicing. Like Rockefeller already mentioned, the stretch in the jeans was able to facilitate some of the things that if we wanted to express our gender identity in a really specific way that we could. I had the great fortune of being mentored by Break Easy from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, who taught all of these informal lessons along with the actual body mechanics of breaking. And he talks specifically about how a lot of immigrant moms worked in sweatshops, and how undergirding this idea of what Quickstep brought up of like fresh and crispy fashion, but also originality. How can you stand out by having certain things that no one else can have, right? With the meager things that you could afford or boost or acquire, how can you personalize it to make it your own, which also stems from gang culture, which Fable has talked about a lot in terms of what the patches meant, what the veterans were coming home with, adorning their bodies. But it really is a statement of self, right? So then what happens when it gets sort of collapsed and sucked up by the neoliberal capitalist garment exploitative industry, right? Which, the leader, the people who were, releasing these clothing lines, like you mentioned, Diddy, Jay-Z, all, Russell Simmons, they were also part of the exploitative garment fast fashion industry. So there's all of these different aspects that we do need to think about, which brings us to what Emile was talking about. First of all, Emile, it's an honor to be here with you. I work with Samuel Leem at UCLA as part of the hip hop studies working group. And so I have heard so much about your work, and it's still to meet you here. But, I want to emphasize again, the neoliberal capitalist agenda, right? Which is this extractionist agenda. Yes, absolutely. The imperative of this project is the extraction of resources, which includes labor, people, right? And the accumulation of wealth at any cost, period, point blank. Racial capitalism, which is a term that was not coined by Cedric Robinson, but is, he's the person who really made this well known, this idea that racism is central to the success of capitalism, right? The exploitation of labor by specifically folks from Africa is is part of making the modern world as we know it today. And I just need to keep putting it back out there, because I feel like as practitioners, we are going about our business from day to day. Like, can I get this move? Can I get this move? Can I, like, am I going to get windmills today finally? And the answer for me is no, I've never gotten windmills. So I'm just going to put that out there. But really central to all of like why we're doing what we're doing, our history's arrival of, as an Asian American person to America really is undergirded by this conversation about labor and resource extraction. So Quick in the comment wrote, "We are asked to forget," I'm quoting him here, "while others make t-shirts that say never forget," right? So again, this is another imperative of the project of specifically US imperialist capitalism, that history is conceived of as a linear progression because it allows for the forgetting and erasure of the terror of the past. Whereas other folks in cultural studies and also, other folks within history conceive of history as being a genealogy, and as Emile talked about, as a circle. Emile Jansen talks a lot about the importance of the cipher, that when we think about things as having circularity as opposed to linearity, then we realize how connected everything is, and that we can't forget, because part of how we got here today is based upon the practices and the things that happened in the past. But also the idea of time is different, because the past is also in the future, which is also in the present, right? So this idea, this delineation between the three is actually, we are all products of the past and we are all part of the future, right? And then let me see, time-wise. Okay, so one more thing. Sonia's talk about the digitization of cultures leading to increased injuries due to the decrease in in-person practice and transmission. I think Rockefeller's inquiry brings us into a conversation about breaking in hip hop culture in the metaverse. It's happening, whether we like it or not, right? We see it reflected in video games. There was so much talk about Fortnite, appropriating these particular dances. And it's happening whether we like it or not, right? Yes, NFTs. So I think this research, these kinds of questions, these challenges to the status quo, to hegemony, like Jacqueline brought up in the first talk, making these demands are critical as we move forward, because otherwise this shit is all gonna be forgotten, right? And this shit will keep moving forward in the name of progress, in a way that it will be Black practices done by not Black folks, right? And for a profit to those who are not the originators of the form. So I appreciate all of, one last thing I have to bring up to Jacqueline. I think two brands that are also critical to hip hop culture are Pro-Keds and Ralph Lauren, Polo specifically, right? Because it brings up this idea of street level redistribution of wealth. So if you know like anything about low head culture, and part of that, and this is like this broadest, fastest version of this, but if Ralph Lauren, Nike, and all these other corporate brands exploit factory garment workers in the name of fast fashion in countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Bangladesh, etc., and those factory workers actually don't know what brands they're working for, because there's so many different levels of subcontracting, which allows for the mass exploitation of factory workers. Then there is some idea that like by boosting this shit, like we're not letting these folks, get the profit that they wanted. It's very problematic in a lot of other different ways, but I feel like that also is really important to understanding the fashion aspect of hip hop culture. And the kind of irony that we're seeing, that the Olympics are now going to use these corporate brands to say, this is our breaking team from this particular nation that has pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and are now part of the modern world, right? And so I will end there, and hopefully we have time for questions, even though it is 11:32.
Thank you so much for all of your commentary. I mean, I'm always blown away when I hear you speak in the way that you're bringing not only the content together here, but I think bringing a real sense of rigor and seriousness to academic institutions and conversations as you go through those spaces as well. So thank you very much for sharing. And we do want to open it up to questions and comments and conversation.
Hi. Just quick. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, got you quick.
Yeah, I find it interesting. It used to be where people couldn't get the most complex breaking moves unless they came to the hood, right? You had to go to particular places it was almost like kung fu. You had to go to a particular like clan to get these particular styles. In tumbling and power tumbling, you can't the average person that tumbles can't get a double foot twist, punch front, round up back handspring, full and back out. They got to go train in a specific place to do that. When I heard Sonia talk about breaking becoming an elite sport, it almost is going to turn breaking on its head, where you can't get the complex moves unless you can go to a particular training facility where moves are learned on YouTube at the highest level. But when it comes to cultural, soaking up of what this culture is, nobody's going to come to the hood to where it exists. Like, it's turning on its head, because people right now don't want to learn about the style and the finesse and the dress code or any of that. They just want to get the most complex moves. And people in the hood right now, they don't have access to gyms where these moves are being done, where they're being learned on mats and things like that, which I think is great. It's a learning process. But a lot of people who I know from around the way don't have access to these gyms now. So the same culture that has been afforded to tumbling and gymnastics is now being soaked up by breaking on elite level. So my fear is the same way gymnastics can't be afforded by people around the way who have a lot of talent, breaking, if we're not careful, will follow the same path.
Thank you. Do any of our panelists want to comment on that or on MiRi's points? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah.
I'll just quickly respond to that. And I think that, first of all, hi, quick. And I think that's a really important take-home message, because it's certainly something that we need to be aware of now, because the train has left the station. This is happening. And this is one of the lessons that we do need to think about, how are we going to ensure that we keep the culture ingrained in what we're doing, but we make sure that all of this is accessible to all, and particularly the people who this is ingrained within, and to the communities that deserve to have the access to all of this. But I think the only caveat I would say to that is the difference that we have with breaking compared to maybe other sports like gymnastics or snowboarding, is that breaking's not just about elite level sport. Breaking's much bigger than that, and there are many other facets to it, whether you're talking about local jams, whether you're talking about hip hop theatre, whether that there's much more to it. So I think it's important that we make sure that the focus doesn't solely stay on the elite sport side, and that responsibility lies with all of us, essentially. That's it.
Emil, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think the sad reality of it, saying something like the train has already left the station, while everybody is actually still home, is also the realization of where are we, and when as soon as I waited a long time to have kids, so my kids are like 5 and 6, and so I'm learning a whole whole other reality about education and the power of education and I call it Eurocation, because essentially globally it's about European information being enforced on people of color's minds, right? And the power that has. And so I have to almost detox my kids when they come home every day to put into context. And so what I'm actually getting at is it's the responsibility of every individual to remind not only ourselves, but our immediate families about what we see unfolding. You know, so my kids already know that, like, what is happening with the, with breaking at the Olympics. They're like, it's some sad shit type of thing, you know, because I remind them, because that's the intention of taking from someone else, you know. And so the other spaces where we do have power, like we are in 15 schools in sorry, in Cape Town, South Africa, where we have taught alternative information so that young people don't value themselves by the West's view of them, you know, and is looking at how do you deconstruct all of this. And again, to use my kids as an example, is that I wasn't aware that I enslave, or I would enslave my children by singing them European lullabies. And so how could I change that? Is I had to sing lullabies that they would then sing to their children. You know, so it is about finding cradle to grave education, or Afrocation is what I call it, to give our children alternative information from the get-go, and for it to be, because with when they had this movement in South Africa of decolonization, is, and I hate that word because it's like the all we did was add D to the that word, which and I feel is more like a rehumanization. That it's like getting our humanity back with the information that really changes this, because you can't fight this battle if you're being fueled from birth that capitalism is the way to go. So you need to actually almost deconstruct what is being fed to your child. Like, I mean, kids come home, they're watching Disney. It's like it's capitalism on steroids in every realm of your awakened mind, right? So it is necessary for us to look at how this information must be changed, you know, and the more the work that we are doing on the ground actually gets implemented outside of academia. You know, the language I speak back home is a Creole language called Afrikaans. The Afrikaners stole this, you know, the Boers, from the people in my community. Myself and a couple of other people are creating a dictionary to take back the language, you know, from them, to, and also in the process expose to my community that these words that are in this language also expose your heritage and your identity, because it is a Creole language that then contains all of this heritage. So for me, in order for us to like address the bigger picture, we can't just be, you know, like having these conversations. We need to look at how do we break down changing the fundamentals in order for us to really address the issue. Because and I'll end up by saying this, that I chose 4 young men from a community that I work in back in Cape Town, from like the heavy gang drug community, which is usually the media's version of a place, because that's always the minority, right? The majority is like good folk trying to just survive. And so these 4 young men do not see themselves by the value system that the West has placed onto them. They've been with me for the last 11 years. And so it's about how do you implement all of this amazing hip hop cultural education into practicality on a daily basis. You know, like how do you, if you're going to interview Quickstep and Rockefeller, who are like, you know, these are my personal heroes. They're here, having them is like, oh, I mean, in the presence of greatness, you know, and have influenced not only myself, but people around the world. Like, these are the ones that institutions should be given doctorates, because they are the ones that have set the foundation of information that is now in all universities, and nobody's giving them the credit for it. So for me, that I think is to not only write these things, but to look at ways of how you can, because on the one end, it's being encoded for academia. What is the process that decodes that content and gets it back into the community? And what is the responsibility of the university in that community, who in most cases have been funded by some sort of history of slavery, put back and take some of those kids in that community into that space? Anyway, I ended that.
Thank you, Emile. Wow. And I really appreciate everything everyone has brought here. It makes me feel like the work we're doing here is not like, you know, a waste of time, or, you know, so each of you, when you speak, this whole speaker series, since when it started, it's an affirmation to a lot of work that's being done locally in the trenches, like I say, not just me and Quick. There's quite a few out there that are doing this kind of reminding our youth and the adults too. There are triple OGs who have, because of what they've been through, they have signed off, logged out. They're done. Maybe they'll do an article, an interview, but they do not want to step back into this because there's so much hurt and betrayal and rejection. So I really just want to say thank you to everybody here. And what I wanted to say is that, we can feel at times, which I felt many times, that like, it's just too much. Like it's such an uphill battle that, the Sonys and the Viacoms, they've got all the power, they've got all those resources, and now the Olympics jumping into, it can feel like, we don't have a prayer, like there's no chance. But that's what hip hop started. Hip hop started without a chance, with nothing. MiRi was saying, like immigrants and people from the South coming in here, and the Cross Bronx being built, fires, crack AIDS, like there's just waves and waves and waves of like, you're gonna die on us. And we were like, no, we're gonna do something else. And so I'm totally boosted, like, not the vaccine. I'm boosted by y'all. And I just want to say that me and Quick just got a grant to be able to go out to different cities and bring your message and bring this idea to different cities in the US, especially at this time, but also to just remind them that the culture can float you to your next incarnation. So if you started breaking, that's great. That's a lot. That's big. And with that, you can leverage that and, have other ways to express and have income and evolve, because the culture is powerful. It's like this beautiful magic carpet, this beautiful seed that you drop it on fertile soil and voila. And so I think that, yes, the Olympics and everything has a big platform, but if we do the same type of local work that y'all are doing and connect to each other and talk about each other's work, and definitely present it like it is tribal. This dance is folklore at this point. Like, we have to resist. Culture is resistance. I think that fires up a few minds and souls. Maybe not everybody, because not everybody's going to be ready or even interested. But a few people will be fired up by what y'all are saying, and they will know that you have a chance to stand for something that is right there. You're doing it. And I believe that the community can build a network and create an ecosystem, especially with all of this brain power and soul power. So I just want to say that we can do it on the local and the community level, and just find cool ways, unique cool points to reach and speak to the younger generations that are coming up, and include the older generation too. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Just watching the hearts light up on everyone's screens. Emile started that. We're over time, and I know we have a lot of mothers and probably fathers with young children in the house today that have a lot on. So I just want to thank everybody for such a beautiful conversation, a difficult conversation if we actually think carefully about what everyone's been talking about. And thank you, Rockefeller, for leaving us on a that positive note when we're up against a lot and it's hard to navigate or figure out where to start a lot of the time. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you so much to our speakers for donating your time and resources and research to the conversation, and everyone for coming out. I know we don't spend time kind of shouting out everyone at the beginning of these sessions, but we see you all. We're so glad everyone's here. And we wish we had a lot more time. So thank you to everyone. Jason, I don't know if you want to say anything else before we sign off.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Mary's saying. It's always an amazing start to the month, being able to come together with so many people and put ideas on the table, things that we've probably been thinking about for a long time or haven't thought about even, and to share. And yeah, Rock, what you said just at the end there, Rockefeller, was like, that was like the perfect outro to think about creative ways to get together and think about and do stuff together. I mean, this is a great example, and it's it's been inspiring for me. So I'm blessed to have everyone here and to be able to share this experience with everyone. And to the panelists today, again, thank you for your time, all your hard work, and all your ideas and sharing. It was great. And looking forward to the next one. Yeah, which is, I think, the 2nd of March. Is that right? Yeah, so we'll be back next month. We'll see everyone here. If you want to join, you know where to find us. Thanks again. And yeah, peace and love.